Mr. Clerk, please record.
I have a quorum present, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Are there any corrections for the journal?
I have no corrections.
Thank you, sir. Are there any messages, reports, or announcements?
There are, Mr. President. First of all, Senator Brandt would like to announce he has selected LB 543 as his priority bill for this session. Judiciary Committee chaired by Senator Lathrop reports Legislative Bill 519 and 543 to general file with committee amendments attached. Hearing notices from Health and Human Services, Government Committee, and the Urban Affairs Committee, all signed by their respective chairs. Enrollment and Review reports Legislative Bill 450A to select file. Enrollment and Review also reports LB 376 is correctly engrossed. And let's see what I got. Is that the right emails? That's all that I have, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. While the legislature is in session and capable of transacting business, I propose to sign and do hereby sign the following two legislative resolutions, number 289 and 290. Senator Colton would like us to recognize Dr. Pat Hotovy of York, Nebraska, who is serving us today as Family Physician of the Day. Dr. Hotovy is with us under the north balcony. Doctor, if you could please rise, I'd like to welcome you to the Nebraska Legislature. Senator Albright has some guests visiting today. We have 16 citizens from the Leadership Wayne Class 13, Wayne, Nebraska, up in the north balcony. If those citizens could please rise, I'd like to welcome you to the Nebraska Legislature. And Senator Walls has 70 guests with us, the state officers and all 7 career and technical student organizations, all with us up in the north balcony. If those individuals could please rise, we can welcome you to the Nebraska Legislature. Members will now move to the agenda. General file consent calendar. You might want to take a look at those rules relevant to consent calendar. First bill, Mr. Clerk.
LB 592 by Senator Stinner. It's a bill for enacting the Automated Medication Systems Act. It provides for the use of automated medication distribution machines, introduced on January 20 of last year. At that time, referred to Health and Human Services. Committee's advanced to general file. There are committee amendments, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Stinner, you recognized to open on LB 592.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of the legislature. LB 592 allows assisted living facilities, which are co-located with long-term care facilities, to utilize automated medication dispensing machines, provided procedures are followed regarding the Automated Medication Systems Act. This bill was brought to me by the Nebraska Department of Veterans Affairs last year to increase the efficiencies of its operation. Currently, there exists automated pharmacy infrastructure in its long-term care facility. However, due to existing language in the statute, its assisted living facility within the same physical structure cannot use this machine, thereby having to dispense medications manually, which can be inefficient and time-consuming. This bill is a fairly straightforward fix, which adds permissive language so that a dispensing machine located in a long-term care facility can be used across the hall in the assisted living facility. This bill still requires compliance with the Automated Medication Systems Act, but grants some flexibility for pharmacies that may not be able to utilize the efficiencies of an on-site dispensing machine. You also see there is a committee amendment under consideration, AM 237, which is an agreement put together with the Nebraska Pharmacy Association to address concerns that they had with the use of prescriptions and the regulation of emergency doses. Chairperson Arch will speak to the details of that amendment, which satisfies my agreement with the Pharmacy Association. I would like to thank Chairperson Arch and the Health and Human Services Committee for their work on the amendment, and to my colleagues in the legislature for your consideration. The bill was passed out of committee on a unanimous vote. With that, colleagues, I would urge you to vote green on LB 592 and AM 237.
Thanks, Senator Stinner. Senator Arch, recognized to open on the committee amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. AM 237 to LB 592 would amend language to clarify that medications dispensed from an automated medication system dispensed for a resident of an assisted living facility co-located within a long-term care facility must be pursuant to a prescription. It would also state that emergency doses may not be taken from an automated medication system prior to review by a pharmacist for residents of an assisted living facility co-located with a long-term care facility. This differs from removal of emergency doses for residents in a hospital or nursing facility. So as Senator Stinner said, this language is technical, but there are regulations that apply to skilled nursing facilities and assisted living facilities, and we just needed to make sure that it was clear in the bill. So LB 592 was advanced out of committee 7-0. I urge your green vote on the amendment and the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Arch. 11 minutes and 45 seconds remaining before the vote. Does anyone care to debate the bill or the committee amendment? I see none. Senator Archer recognizes closing committee amendment. Waives closing. Question from the body adoption of the committee amendment. AM 237. Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote nay. Have you all voted care to? Record, please.
38 ayes, no nays on adoption of committee amendments.
AM 237 is adopted. Any further discussion on the bill? Senator Stinner waives closing. Question from the body, the advance of LB 592 as amended to ENR initial. Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote nay. Have you all voted care to? Record, please.
40 ayes, no nays on the advancement of the bill.
LB 592 advances. Next bill, please.
Mr. President, LB 754 was a bill originally introduced by Senator Bostar. It's a bill for an act relating to schools that extends the commercial air filter pilot program, introduced on January 5 of this year. At that time, referred to the Education Committee. The bill is advanced to general file. I have no amendments to the bill at this time, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Bostar recognized to open on LB 754.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. LB 754 is a bill to extend the timeline of a study created by LB 630, which passed last session, to include the 2023-24 academic year. To refresh your memory, LB 630 tasked the Nebraska Department of Education in consultation with the University of Nebraska with the development and implementation of a pilot program to study the efficacy of commercial air filters in classrooms and their impact on academic and behavioral performance. across the 2021-22 and 2022-23 school year. LB 630 passed on final reading 44-2 last session, was signed into law by the governor on May 25th, 2021. LB 754 advanced to the floor with unanimous support from the Education Committee and received no opposition testimony. Due to global supply chain challenges impacting many industries across the nation the last several months, the University of Nebraska researchers conducting the study were unable to obtain a sufficient number of air filters prior to the beginning of the 2021-22 school year. LB 754 simply extends the timeline of the study to include the 2023-24 school year in order to assure a full 2 school years of data collection are available. The adjustment of the timeline has no fiscal impact and has been requested by the University of Nebraska researchers in order to ensure a scientifically significant data set for the results of the study. Given the potential impact that cleaner air can have on our educational environments, and given what a simple adjustment LB 754 creates, as well as support that the Nebraska Legislature has already shown this project, it would be a missed opportunity not to provide a sufficient amount of time to the researchers conducting the study. I would encourage you to support LB 754.
Thanks, Senator Boastar. Any discussion on LB 754? I see none. Senator Boastar, you recognize close. He waives closing. Question for the Bazzi, advance of 754 to ENR initial. Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote nay. Have you all voted? Record, please.
40 yeas, no nays on the advancement of the bill.
LB 754 advances. Next bill, please.
Legislative Bill 758, a bill originally introduced by Senator Brandt, relates to the Nebraska Farm to School Program Act that defines terms that changes provisions relating to the Nebraska Farm to School Program. Introduced on January 5 of this year, refer to the Education Committee, advance to general file. There are committee amendments pending, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Branch recognized to open on LB 758.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. Good morning, colleagues. Today I'm asking for your support for LB 758, a simple cleanup bill to include early childhood programs in the current Farm to School program. Last year, I introduced and the legislature passed LB 396, which was a bill that expanded the scale and reach of Nebraska-produced food by creating a statewide farm-to-school program administered by the Nebraska Department of Education with the cooperation of the Nebraska Department of Agriculture. The bill created a full-time position at the Department of Education to administer the program and to provide networking resources for schools, vegetable and fruit growers, dry bean, grain, meat, egg, and dairy producers in Nebraska to increase the quantity of quality local food served in our school cafeterias. That bill passed unanimously from the Education Committee, was a Speaker priority bill, and passed unanimously on the floor. After the bill became law, a few folks reached out to the Nebraska Department of Education to ensure that early childhood programs would be included, and unfortunately, the language that we passed last year was too restrictive. So that assistance could only be offered to elementary and secondary schools. LB 758 corrects this oversight and adds a reference in the Farm to School program to the statute that defines early childhood education programs. Farm to School has immense support across Nebraska and is helping our kids, educators, producers, and the economy. With that, you will hear an explanation of the Education Committee amendment. I ask for your green vote on LB 758. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Brandt. Senator Walsh recognized open on the Education Committee amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning. AM 1684 simply clarifies that the expansion of the Farm to School program to early childhood programs includes any early childhood program licensed under the Child Care Licensing Act. This change is consistent with Senator Brandt's intent and allows NDE to provide technical assistance to all of these programs to help get the benefits of Farm to School to even more kiddos across the state. The amendment does not add a fiscal note. I encourage your green vote on the amendment and the bill. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Walls. Discussion on the bill and the pending amendment. Senator Clements.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would Senator Brandt yield to a question?
Senator Brandt, would you yield, please?
Yes.
Senator Brandt, it wasn't clear to me what schools are eligible. Is this just public schools or also private schools?
Also private schools.
All right, and so if a private school has an early childhood program, they're eligible for this with this bill?
That's my understanding.
Thank you. That's all I needed. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Clements. Any further discussion on the bill or committee amendment? I see none. Senator Walls, you recognize a close on the committee amendments. Your ways closing. Question for the body's adoption of AM 1684 committee amendment. Those in favor, vote aye. Those opposed, vote nay. Have you all voted? Record, please.
40 ayes, no nays on adoption of committee amendments.
AM 1684 committee amendment has been adopted. Any further discussion of the bill? I see none. Senator Branch, recognize a close. Your ways closing. Question for the body is the advance of LB 758 to ENR initial. Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote nay. Have you all voted? Record, please.
43 ayes, no nays on the advancement of the bill, Mr. President.
LB 758 advances. Next bill, please.
Legislative Bill 892, bill originally introduced by Senator Walls. It's a bill for enacting the Nebraska Real Estate License Act. It changes provisions relating to restrictions on unlicensed persons, applicability of the act, and brokers' license applications. Introduced on January 7 of this year, referred to the Banking, Commerce, and Insurance Committee, advanced to general file. I have no amendments to the bill, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Walls, recognized open to LB 892.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Members, please come to order.
Good morning, everyone. And thank you, first of all, to Chairman Williams and his committee for hearing this bill. And thank you to Speaker Hilders for placing LB 892 on the consent calendar today. LB 892 was brought to me by the Real Estate Commission and is essentially a cleanup bill that clarifies in statute the way laws are currently being enforced. First, the bill makes clear that wholesalers, these are people or individuals that enter into a contract for the purchase of real estate and then try to market that contract before taking title to the property, require a real estate license. So for example, wholesalers who would buy a house would enter into a purchase agreement and close in 2 months. Over the course of those 2 months, they sell their interest to someone else before closing or even owning the property. This is addressed at the end of Section 1 and at the end of Section 2, subsection 1. The Real Estate Commission has always interpreted the law this way, but they just prefer to have that in statute with a line to point to rather than having to get an attorney's opinion. This is a rare occurrence at the moment, but we're trying to have this cleaned up so it doesn't become a problem in the future. The second piece of this bill would remove the waiver by experience procedures for those that have not had the statutorily required 2 years experience required to become a broker. That piece is addressed in Section 3, subsection 3B by removing, quote, equivalent or sufficiently relevant experience in a real estate related industry. So basically, we are ensuring that someone has 2 years of experience to become a real estate broker. To give a little bit more context, someone has to be a real estate agent first and work for a real estate agency. After 2 years, they can become a real estate broker where they can practice or start their own agency. Again, this bill is just a cleanup bill that makes sure we have in statute the way the law is being interpreted. There was no opposition to LB 892, and the Realtors Association came in full support. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Walls. Debate is now open on the bill. Senator Erdman.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Good morning. I was wondering if Senator Walls yield to a question.
Senator Walls, you yield, please.
I will.
Senator Walls, thank you. So your last comment there, so someone could not take the required education and become a broker without 2 years of experience? Is that what you're saying?
You would have to have 2 years of experience as a realtor before becoming a broker.
That's not the way it is now, right?
It's equivalent, it says equivalent or, just a second, sorry. Equivalent or sufficiently relevant experience. This codifies it and says you have to have 2 years of experience
All right.
as
So-
a realtor.
Okay. Let me see if I can clarify this a little. When I became a real estate agent back in '03, there was an option. I could have became a salesperson, or if I took more required classes, more hours, I could have become a broker. That provision will longer be available?
According to this, it says that you would have to have 2 years of experience before automatically becoming a broker.
So after 2 years of experience, I automatically become a broker, or do I still have to test for it?
No. No, you still have to test for it, Senator Urban. I think you know better than that.
Okay, so you're saying we still have to take the test?
Yeah, you sure do.
Okay. So what's the reason for changing that?
It's just to make sure that someone has 2 years of experience and it's not just a, again, equivalent or sufficiently relevant. I mean, they're clarifying that.
So have there been some problems with people who had gotten their broker's license directly when they first started into real estate? Has it been a problem? Is that why we introduced this?
You know, I don't know the answer to that question. I mean, personally, I think it's important that everybody, before just, hanging up a shingle and saying that I'm a real estate broker, I think it's important that you do have 2 years of experience. So I would imagine that that's why this is so important.
Do you know of anyone who became a broker directly from the general population who took the test and the required education and became a broker?
I don't personally.
I would assume there are some. And if there is some, I don't see that it's a big problem. I don't know that those people have been doing things incorrectly. If they've had the necessary training.
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I think you're a solution, a problem looking for a solution here. I don't think it's necessary to do that last part.
I think it's just a clarification for the Real Estate Commission, so there's no confusion.
Well, there was no confusion before. You take the necessary classes and take the test, you become a broker. You have 2 years of experience and you take the test and you pass, you become a broker. What's the confusion? There's none. I think the confusion
That's your
is
opinion,
on-
Senator Erdman.
Yeah. Well, that may be because I have common sense and this doesn't look like it's common sense to me. And so I think this is what it is. I think it's a protectionist bill to make sure that not a lot of people get into real estate. That's all the questions I had.
Oh, great. Thank you.
I think that's what it is. We've done that before. We raised the number of hours to recertify every 2 years. And we did that. And then we raised the standards of the test. So it eliminates some people from getting into real estate. It's a protectionist attitude that they have. I don't know that this is a good idea. Either they pass a test, they understand what real estate brokerage is, or they don't.
1 minute.
We continue to make it more difficult for people to get a job, for people to do their job because we have more stipulations and regulations in place. So I'm not in favor of 892 if it has that qualification in it. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Erdman. Members, there are 8 minutes remaining. Senator Hilkeman, you recognize.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. Would Senator Walz answer a question for me, please?
Senator Walz, will you yield, please?
Yes.
Yeah, there was a period of, what I'd like to know is if there was a period of time I was fairly active in the real estate market, and when we would write a contract, we would put our names and or assigns in case of a period that if you found someone that you wanted to sell the contract to or whatever before it closed, you could do that. Is that go away?
Yes, that would go away. Prior to it closing, you wouldn't be able to sell it prior, your interest in a.
So I could not assign that contract to another buyer.
Are you selling it, Senator Hilkeman, or are you signing it?
If you're the buyer when we would buy property, we would write that in there. So in case for some reason we had to get out of the contract and we wanted to assign it to someone else, we didn't have to go through another contract.
Okay, I guess I'm trying to, sorry, I can't see you. I'm trying to decide, are you selling that interest though,
If
or are
I-
you just assigning?
Let's say I brought property A and I'd put my name and I'd say I'm buying property A for $500,000 and I'd have my name and or assigns.
Okay, that's fine.
So that
would be-
continues to work.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry it took so long to understand the question. Senator.
Thanks, Senator. Senator Clements.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would Senator Walls yield to a
Senator Walls,
question?
yield, please.
Why, sure, Senator Clements.
Similar situation. Let's say my son's looking to buy a house, but he hasn't qualified for a loan yet. So I go ahead and sign a purchase agreement to buy it, that he's going to then I want to assign that purchase agreement to him so I don't close on the house. Have I become a salesman? Am I prohibited in that
No,
situation?
you're not.
Um,
Are you going through an attorney to do that? Or how, like, what's the process that you're
I
using?
got a purchase agreement on a piece of property with a realtor,
Yeah, you don't have to have a realtor to sell a piece of property.
and
That's the
I'm not
answer.
going to own the property. I'm not closing. I'm just assigning the contract to my son as soon as he gets qualified on his loan approval.
So you're,
I'm a buyer, but I'm not going to close, but I want my son to close on it and to assign the contract to him.
I
Can I do
think
that?
I think that there, so I think the issue is that you're selling your interest at a higher value than what you bought it for prior to closing on the property.
Oh, well, I would be selling it for the same price as the
Right,
contract.
so I don't think that that's an
Just-
issue. I think it's when you, as a wholesaler, buy a property with another person, for instance, and prior to you even owning the property or closing on the property, you sell your interest to Senator Blood
You find a
at
higher
a
bid,
higher,
a higher bidder.
yes,
Okay, that's what's prohibited in this bill.
yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Clements. 4 minutes remaining. Senator Williams, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm standing up as chairman of the Banking, Commerce, and Insurance Committee, which heard this bill on January 31st. This bill was brought to Senator Walls by the Real Estate Commission, trying to solve a couple of really interesting issues that they believe that they have. The one that Senator Erdman was talking about was the fact that right now, under the law, there's language that they can weigh all this previous experience and try to waive things. They wanted to make that cleaner by simply having the 2-year requirement. I think that clearly makes sense, and it made sense to the Banking Committee. The other one is the one that Senator Clements and others were talking about. We have a situation that's changed in the marketplace over time. We have a number of people now that are just cash buyers, and they're just flipping homes. They're offering cash to buy the thing, and they are then selling those an interest in that contract itself, not selling the real estate. And Mr. Lemon from the Real Estate Commission wanted to clarify when a realtor needed to be involved, when a broker needed to be involved, and that's what this legislation is attempting to do. Again, the committee heard the hearing. Wish all of you could have been there, but we heard the hearing, and the bill was voted out 8-0. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Williams. Any further discussion? I see none. Senator Walls recognized to close. She waives closing. Question from the body, the advance of LB 892 to E&R initial. Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote nay. Have you all voted? Record, please.
38 ayes, 4 nays on the advancement of the bill.
LB 892 advances. Final consent calendar bill, please.
LB 708. It's a bill by Senator Hughes. It relates to the law. It eliminates a copyright requirement introduced on January 5, referred to the Executive Board for public hearing, advanced to general file. I have no amendments to the bill, Mr. President.
Thank you. Senator Hughes recognized to open LB 708.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. LB 708 was brought to me by the Reviser of Statutes, Marcia McClure. The bill strikes a provision in section 49-707 that requires the reviser to copyright the supplements and reissue volumes of Nebraska statutes. Last year, the U.S. Copyright Office notified our reviser's office that the legislature could not register a copyright claim for the 2019 General Index. The denial followed a 2020 United States Supreme Court decision which found that federal, state, and local statutes and court decisions are in the public domain and are ineligible for copyright, a concept known as government edicts doctrine. The court held that under the government edicts doctrine, officials empowered to speak with the force of law cannot be authors of, and therefore cannot copyright, the works they create in the course of their official duties. The Supreme Court's holding applies to judges and legislators and any commissions deriving power therefrom, regardless of whether the work carries the force of law. Although the statutes themselves are never eligible for copyright, the reviser had registered the supplements and reissues for copyright protection as required by Nebraska statute. Until recent interpretations of the Supreme Court's decision by the U.S. Copyright Office, which indicated that such source notes, catchlines, analysis, index, and finally annotations are also not subject to registration with the Copyright Office. I believe it is appropriate to repeal this statutory requirement since the reviser can no longer comply with it. There were no opponents at the hearing, and I'd be happy to try and answer any questions. I would appreciate your green vote in advancing LB 708 to general file. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hughes. Is there any discussion on the bill? I see none. Senator Hughes, you waives closing. Question for the body, the advancement of LB 708 to ENR initial. Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote nay. Have you all voted? Record, please.
43 ayes, no nays on the advancement of the bill.
LB 708 advances. Proceeding on the agenda, General File 2022 Senator Priority Bill. Mr. Clerk. But let's take some items for the record first,
Thank
please.
you, Mr. President. Urban Affairs Committee reports LB 695 to general file with amendments attached. Senator Linehan amendments to 939 to be printed. And Senator Matt Williams has selected LB 1069 as his personal priority bill for this session. That's all that I have.
Now proceeding on the agenda, General File 2022 Senator Priority Bill.
Mr. President, 986, the bill has been discussed, originally introduced by Senator Breese. It relates to adopts the School District Property Tax Limitation Act. It's been discussed on February 1, 2, and 3. When the legislature left the issue last pending was the committee amendments as offered by the Revenue Committee. An amendment to those amendments by Senator Matt Hansen. And Senator Hunt had offered a priority motion, which was to refer the bill back to the Revenue Committee. That is the motion pending, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senators Breese, Linehan, Matt Hansen, and Senator Hunt, why don't you take a minute or so each to refresh us on where we left off, then we'll go to the speaking queue. Senator Breese, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. LB 986 is amended by AM 1702 would generally limit school property tax asking increases to the higher of 2.5% or inflation. It would allow for a school board to bypass this when necessary by 75% vote.
I believe it accommodates the concerns of education. It's a very small step we can take in the name of property tax relief. It's a reasonable step, and it can be an important cog in our efforts to reform education funding. Various concerns have been leveled relative to the bill, especially from the education lobby. And I think the mantra there has been just say no. Just say no worked as an anti-drug slogan, but it doesn't work the best down here. Our failure to enact some sort of a reasonable cap or limitation in this instance really tees it up pretty nicely for the folks out there that would like to put a cap proposal on the ballot. And so I would urge everyone to take a hard look at what we're doing in here. And in the spirit of cooperation, I would urge the opponents to reach out with any suggestions that they may have on how they would like to improve this bill. I'm willing to make some changes, some concessions to move this to select file, and it's something that we could address on select file. But with that said, again, I would urge your consideration and reach out with thoughts or concerns. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Breezy. Senator Linehan, if you'd like a minute or two to refresh us on the committee amendment, you're welcome to do so.
Thank you, Senator Breezy. Excuse me. Good morning, Mr. President. The committee amendment 1702 is a white copy amendment, which we've all been through this. So I would just like to echo what Senator Breezy said. I am more than willing to work on the numbers here. We had the opportunity on Thursday in the Revenue Committee. We had the epic tax in front of us, and we had multiple testifiers. And I have decided over the weekend that one of the problems we have on the floor is we're all in different committees, and we hear from the interest groups that come to our committees to testify. So the Revenue Committee, more than anybody else, I believe, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, spends a lot of time hearing from Nebraskans who are very, very concerned about taxes, and specifically about property taxes. I think on Thursday, we got out of here about 6. There were other bills, so it wasn't all epic tax and property taxes from 1:30 to 6 p.m., but it was the vast majority of it. And this somehow has gotten hijacked into somehow we're trying to harm schools, or we don't believe in public schools. And that's not it at all. What we're trying to do here is to find some way that we can help everyone. Make sure the schools have secure funding, have enough funding, but also make sure that we're not driving people out of their homes or off their farms, which we clearly are. And if you were on the Revenue Committee and you heard these testifiers, you would know it. So I'm going to take my 5 minutes here, and this is public testimony that we got last Thursday. My husband is still working. However, we've been discussing a move upon retirement to find a state with more equitable tax laws. Here in Nebraska, we carry an unusually high rate of tax.
Senator Linehan, you had 2 minutes just to give us a brief overview of the amendment. So thank you for doing so.
You're welcome.
Senator Manhanson, a couple of minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. So my AM 1716 strikes Section 3 of the bill. That's most of the operative provisions of the bill or of the Revenue Committee amendment. I don't pretend to think that that is a friendly amendment. It's certainly not meant to be friendly. And while I have just another minute here, I want to address this kind of issue of compromise. I am willing to do a lot of things to improve the state. But if your line in the sand is something that is flat out bad policy, I don't know why the burden is on me to then try and enable that and go forward. I do not think these caps are appropriate, and I don't think there's any number that I could support that would be meaningful to the proponents of this bill and vice versa. And I think it's inherently tied with schools and how we operate schools, because this is effectively a budgetary cap on schools that's done through their property tax asking. It's getting to how we run our schools, not necessarily what rate and what levy we do of taxes. So if we want to move forward, if we want to talk about compromise, colleagues, compromise has to come both directions, and there's probably some other revenue things that maybe could win some votes if they could get some actual fair discussion on the floor. With that, I'll talk more in my time. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. And Senator Hunt, a couple of minutes on your recommit motion.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. From the beginning and through all the negotiation and amendments and the ways we've discussed this basic policy idea over the past couple years, have been against the principles in LB 986. I think it puts schools in a bind. It gets rid of local control that is so important for these communities that really know best how to manage their own schools and their own budgets. And I also have fundamental problems with the language in the bill, like talking about a legal voter. Like, we don't have to put legal voter in statute. That's really redundant and weird. And saying that in a special election, they're going to need 60% of the vote to change anything. I've never heard of an election where you can't win without 60% of the vote. That's also really weird. And so just technical problems with the bill. But I became activated and filed this motion hoping to basically kill the bill, because I became frustrated hearing conversations on the floor about how the plight of property owners and the plight of the wealthier people in our state, and how they've been begging us to do something for them. But time and time again in this body, we've been unable to do something to fundamentally help the most disadvantaged and the people who live in poverty, the people in tough socioeconomic conditions in our state, even when the bills don't cost anything. For example, bills around supplemental nutrition assistance program, bills around anti-discrimination and equity, and the people who are standing up in support of LB 986 saying, why don't you think about, the poor suffering people? It always is their poor suffering people, not the bigger picture of the broad population of Nebraska. So that's what caused me to get up and file the motion, and I would encourage your support. Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor.
Thanks, Senator Hunt. Moving now to the speaking queue, Senator Mikhail Kavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. Good morning, colleagues. I continue to be in opposition to this bill, and I echo the sentiments that Senator Matt Hansen made in his refreshing on this. I'm going to take issue with Senator Breezy and Senator Linehan this morning. There's an article in the Omaha World Herald where they both are quoted talking about how they know that this isn't going to work the way that it's intended, and that they challenge us to propose something better. I've proposed things. I proposed things last week, and we had 4 days, and I didn't hear from either one of you. 4 days off, and I didn't hear from either one of you, and you know I oppose it, and you know that I have offered other things. But here you are in black and white telling the World Herald that nobody's willing to work with you. But from my perspective, you're not willing to work with me. When somebody opposes my bill and they stand on the floor and they spend hours talking about what they don't like about it, I go and figure out how to make it better. I'm very tired of this double standard. If you want a compromise, then work on a compromise. But don't chastise me on the floor of the legislature saying I'm unwilling to compromise. And if I oppose something, then I oppose it. But I am always willing to listen. I'm always willing to talk. I've always been willing to talk to both of you. But I am tired of being told on the microphone over and over again, and now in black and white, that I'm not willing to work with you. You both know that that is not true. That is patently false. I will have a conversation with you. I will try to find some middle ground if it's possible. And I am not told by any lobbyists what to do. The school don't like it. And I like the schools. But that's not why I'm opposing this. I'm opposing this because I think it is bad policy, and I don't think that it is the way to achieve true property tax relief and school funding. That is why I oppose it. not because somebody told me to. And I'm pretty sure every single person in this room and in that rotunda can agree that it is very hard to tell me to do something. I'm a Capricorn. I'm pretty stubborn. Not to give Capricorns a bad rap. There's a lot of great Capricorns that probably are more flexible than I am. I'm not married to any of the numbers we have in here, but it's been a practice of the opponents to say no. Where is your compromise? Where is your conversation? Did you talk to somebody other than me that's been opposing it? 4 days. 4 days. I know you know how to reach me. I'm going to continue opposing it. I'm just disappointed when I read things like this that are clearly not who I am. And I know you both know that. And I'm actually hurt. I'm hurt to read this. Because it says to the people at home that there's nobody in here, that you shouldn't have any faith in any of us to ever work on any problem. And that's not true. The people of Nebraska should have faith in us to work on problems. And when you come to me with something that I don't fundamentally oppose, I'm certain that we will come to a compromise. But I oppose putting spending caps on local taxing authorities. I oppose that because it goes to a vote of the people. And if the people want to increase spending in their areas, they should be allowed to do that. And it's also really generous to say that there's a united front against this bill. I'm pretty sure that there's not a united front against anything or for anything in this legislature. So thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor.
Thanks, Mr. Kavanaugh. Senator Matt Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning again, colleagues. I did want to rise and continue my discussion of this bill, and I wanted to allude to the article that I certainly read, I know a number of us did, that Senator Kavanaugh just referenced. Colleagues, there appears to be an article in the World Herald where the sponsor and lead supporters of this bill acknowledge that it's fundamentally broken and kind of acknowledge that our criticism of this bill this past week or so is accurate. Colleagues, had we not put up the fight, had we not done what we done, this bill could have potentially sailed through, and bad policy or not, broken numbers or not, it would have been enacted into law. It took multiple days of raising these issues repeatedly to get an acknowledgement that the math didn't work the way the math was purported to work. And this is things that have been in black and white in the bill from the day it's been first debated. Colleagues, when you're telling me that you know the bill doesn't work the way you want it to, but you still really want it, I'm not necessarily sure, like when I'm negotiating, am I negotiating on the side of correct math? Like what part of this negotiation am I supposed to be taking? Like where is my negotiation supposed to be coming forward? At a certain point, if the proposal itself is not in good shape, if it's not good policy, there's a little bit of I'm allowed to just say no. Like if the numbers don't make sense, the numbers don't make sense, and I don't have to go brainstorm and work new numbers to accomplish the thing that you say is your number one issue. Like I'm willing to hear other things. Like I said, I don't necessarily support caps on schools. If there was some sort of compromise and things that I wanted got incorporated, sure, like I can maybe agree on a number, but I'm going to venture a guess that the number that I would want, my basically floor is going to be higher than your ceiling. And that's the thing is, I keep talking about this over and over and over again, is there's one side kind of negotiating with itself, one position kind of negotiating with itself, that we have to get these caps done so we can change TIOSA. I'm not in a rush to change TIOSA, especially if it's conditioned on these caps. So when you say, if this bill fails, we're not going to change TIOSA this year, or we're going to do something else, that's not much of a threat to me, because that's you're threatening me with also something that I'm pretty skeptical of. That there's not the backup there. So colleagues, if you want comprehensive changes to school funding, if you want comprehensive changes to school policy, if you want comprehensive changes to school taxes, propose it. And we're free to critique it. And you've got multiple priorities, I'm sure, looming out there, and we'll do another one as well. But when there's a fundamentally broken bill, as we've kind of acknowledged, that in my mind is also just fundamentally bad education policy. I don't know why there's a burden or a thought or a notion that I have to come to the table to fix things that have been apparently broken since day one, that don't accomplish what they want to do. And as I've been saying, are harsher on the larger growing school districts than they are on other ones. As I've said before, I'll say it many times, I'm sure I'll say it many times again, if you don't want my vote as a Lincoln senator who represents Lincoln Public Schools family, that's fine, but don't do a bill that brings down the hammer that cuts Lincoln Public Schools' ability, authority, flexibility, whatever. Don't do that to my school district and then act surprised that I don't want to say cut their spending authority and potentially give away their state aid. Because that is not something I can talk to my constituents with in a straight face.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, this has been clear that this bill is important. I grant that it's important. I grant that people care about it deeply. But it is, as we've talked about it last year, as we've talked about this idea over and over again, it is, for me at least, pretty close to a non-starter. Because I think it is a really strict and severe restriction to a largely inflated or problem in terms of the out-of-control school spending. We want to address property taxes, property tax credit relief fund, actually changing some levies or something. Okay, we could talk about this, but when you're saying, hey, we're going to mess in with school budget authority as kind of a back-end way to then leverage dollars later in the future to solve property taxes, that's where you start losing me on that, whether or not it's even good policy in the first place. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Senator Groney.
I still stand in support of LB 986 and its actual mission and the issue it's trying to address. I don't know if it's the right vehicle. A simpler way to do it would be just say after the Joseph formula, it's figured that they can't, and their local effort is figured they can't collect more than 2.5% more than what the state of Nebraska told them of the money they needed to fund their school, but that would be simple. We continue to, in this body for as long as I've been here, to kind of mess around the edges of a huge problem on property taxes, and we all, I think, understand that the huge increases have came through funding our schools because of how our funding formula is, where local resources come in first and state aid second. I haven't seen a good policy here yet in 7 years, except for Senator Breezy's bill last year that lowered the valuation for ag land in bond elections. That addressed the true problem. The rest of it has been tax shifts where that's what a tax credit is. It's a tax shift. We give a credit on property taxes against overpayment of income taxes. So anyway, but it is a placeholder for funds that maybe this body in the future can use to actually do good policy on how we fund our schools. The property tax issue is, according to that story in the World Herald, is not dead. I still have LB 1207 in Revenue Committee. It addressed it, it's good policy. It's a compromise between 1106 of a year ago, and it's a heck of a lot better than 890 because it does not address or change anything in the needs side of the formula. All it does is addresses the rural property tax problem and the property tax problem in our residential areas by lowering the valuations. Everything else stays the same and creates guaranteed state funding, call it foundation aid. I know that's a bad word to some folks, but it creates foundation aid based on revenues of the state and also addresses what Senator Friesen and I have always butted heads over. How does that foundation get calculated? Nobody gets less than 15% of their basic funding. Everybody else gets a share of 15% of the total state revenues. It works. It's good policy. Simplified it enough that I even think, won't mention names, but everybody could understand it. Because I've always been told my good policy bills have been too complicated to understand. Anyway, it's a good bill. I hope it comes out of committee. It's a true answer. It doesn't take money away from the schools. It does
come up against the rock and the hard place. The rock and the hard place is we need to give more state funding to schools, and some folks don't want to do that to rural schools. And the hard place is the schools scream that they need more state funding, but they don't want to give up their property taxing authority. They want it, the best of both worlds, which LB 890, which we'll hear later, does. Pleases everybody except the property taxpayer. Anyway, 1207, take a look at it. It does answer and gives hard numbers and addresses the funding side of the formula, gives true property tax relief, gives true state aid to all schools and all children whose parents also pay income and sales taxes. So I will support LB 986, but Senator Breezy said he's looking at answers. Just strike the white copy, strike the original language.
1 minute.
Say that after the state aid is increased, is figured, a local effort, limit them to 2.5% growth on that when they tax on the new valuations on August 20th. That is a true answer to holding down surprise tax increases to local taxpayers. But anyway, we'll see where 1207 goes. I think the good people on the, knowledgeable people on the Revenue Committee, and when we have the hearing, I'll repeat this opening, Senator Linehan. But anyway, we will see where it goes. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Groningen. Senator Breezy.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't want to shift away to consumption tax, but I am for a second here. I really want to thank Senator Erdman for his reintroduction of his epic consumption tax proposal. It really afforded us in the Revenue Committee a chance to hear that proposal, and it's really unfortunate that this entire body wasn't there to hear the testimony. Why do I say that? Because the testimony we heard last week on Senator Erdman's consumption tax proposal really served to me to reinforce the need for steps to reduce the property tax burden on Nebraskans. It was a reminder of the angst and the anger felt by many Nebraskans over their property tax burden. So who do we hear from? I don't have an exhaustive list here. I think some others might speak to this, but we heard from a farmer from Kearney who said his family farm is being taxed into oblivion. We heard from another testifier talking about the loss of their family farm. We heard from a landlord who pays over a third of his farm rental income in property taxes. A third of it. His rental income, what he's worked for all his life to be able to retire and rent his farm out, he pays a third of that rental income in property taxes. And so what about insurance and family living expenses on down the line? What's he living on? Not sure. Another testifier who's thinking about moving to a more tax-friendly state. A rancher complaining of the loss of hundreds of cattle producers, with folks leaving the state because of our unreasonable, unsustainable over-reliance on property taxes to fund local government. Another testifier told how she had to borrow every year to pay her property taxes. Said she accumulated $40,000 in credit card debt doing so. She gave the example of a owner of 350 acres and a $350,000 house in Missouri paying $7,000 in property taxes, and where in Nebraska, somebody that owned 40 acres and an old house are paying more than that. Another noted how people are hurting from their property tax burden. An Omaha business owner noted how property taxes will, in his words, make or break a business. Another testifier noted her property taxes went from $1,444 in 2015 to $3,257 today in 2021. Then we heard from a cattleman saying 10% of his gross income goes to paying school salaries. And he was talking gross income, wasn't talking net income. And any of you that know much about agriculture know that it's a high capital, low margin business, and 10% straight off the top is a huge swath of your profits. Another spoke of his brother-in-law, a rancher, paying $51,000 in property taxes with, quote, no money to raise family on, unquote. Another spoke of her property taxes going up by 31% in 1 year. And we could go on here, but I think you really see the point. Somebody here on the floor a little while ago said what we're trying to do by limiting the growth of property tax askings in LB 986. I think they said it was not appropriate. Well, I think we heard from a whole lot of testifiers last week on Senator Erdman's proposal who would disagree with that assessment. If everyday Nebraskans were voting on this proposal, they likely would support it. And if we don't do something, I would predict that Nebraskans may get the chance on the ballot someday. And so I would urge your support. I'm going to talk about a little more how this works and my thoughts for resolving some of the issues here, maybe when I get some time yielded to me later. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Breezy. Senator Pauls.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, that goes for the consumption tax is going to be on the floor, because all the comments that Senator Breezy made was from that group that I also listened to. And I was impressed with some of the dilemma that they were in. So maybe this is a precursor to that bill when it does hit the floor. I thank you for that. I did not vote this out of the committee for one reason, because I did not think the numbers had been vetted. But by listening to the two senators, they're willing to work on that. To me, that's a positive move to make sure that we understand, because I'm looking at all these percentages. Who did that? I don't know. Was there some magician up here? That's in my mind. Was there some magician giving those out? But I hear that we're willing to work at it, and that's making me take a different view of this bill. And I do understand when you talk about the people who come in front of our committee, the Revenue Committee, you get worn out because the people come there with an issue. But I also will say, many, many years ago, when my granddad was a county commissioner, all he talked about was taxes then. Taxes is never going to be a popular item. But I do believe if we're willing to take a look at this and maybe look at some of the issues of the percentages, et cetera, I could vote to move this bill forward. The business groups that have come in front of our committee on this particular bill, I'm just going to read one of the statements from one of the groups. Placing restrictions on property tax asked by the school districts gets at the core of the problems. School districts must live within their means as small businesses do, especially in this particular time. I heard that time and again from the Cattlemen, Farm Bureau, the Chamber, they did come with some reservations, but they came from all the businesses, whether you're agriculture, manufacturing, small business, they are saying, hey, take a look at this. So I'm willing to do that. And I also will say one of the biggest proponents of this was the Lincoln Independent Business Association. And the individual said they have over 1,100 members in that. I'm just saying that's from Lincoln. So we have to balance this out about the Lincoln Public Schools and also what the community is saying. To me, I would feel good if we would pass this bill on, and between now and select file, we could get some of those issues, if at all possible, to be settled. Because it's not going to go away. And I would be disappointed if my past history is education, that if we would not at least listen and see if we could not come with something that we could live with. Because as the fiscal note says, this is basically, this would be like the third cap on school districts. Apparently the first two are not working, and some people believe that we need another cap to sort of balance things out. But as Senator Breezy said, and Senator Linehan said, the people who come in front of the Revenue Committee, they're not complimenting us on our tax policies. So as I say, I am moving over, hopefully that we can do something to change the bill to some degree on select. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Pauls. Senator Morfeld.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I rise in opposition to the legislation and continue to be in opposition. And I just want to touch on a few different points, some that were made by my seatmate and colleague, Senator Pauls, and some that we began discussing last week. So first, school districts are living within their means, and if they're not living within their means, there's political consequences for it. And those political consequences are that those school board members have to go back to their constituency and run for re-election. And we hear about schools being the problem here and them being the driver of property tax increases. And yet, when you look at school board races across the state, overwhelmingly, these school districts that are supposedly the problem, these school board members are being reelected. Senator Pauls brings up my community that I represent, Lincoln, and notes that there's one business entity that happens to be in support of this, but yet overwhelmingly, the school board has been reelected time and time again by record margins on the ballot, sometimes unopposed. So the voters clearly don't agree. The voters clearly think that Lincoln Public Schools is living within its means and are accountable to the people. And I tell you what, when people get upset about something, they don't just sit around and thumb their noses. They get involved. They recruit candidates. They run themselves. So I think Lincoln Public Schools and the Lincoln community is pretty happy with their school board and their school spending. And don't take my word for it. Look at the elections. Overwhelmingly reelected each and every single time. So I appreciate that there's a business group out there that supports this legislation, but let's look to what the voters are actually voting for. And they're overwhelmingly voting back in the people that are managing our school district and in charge of ensuring that we have a high quality education. As Senator Pauls noted, we already have two limitations. I think some more actually than that, but we have at least two limitations on school spending already. I think that's enough. There's a third limitation, and again, that's called an election. And if school board members are overspending and abusing their power and not living within their means, the voters will vote them out. That's elections. That's accountability. They don't need people in Lincoln telling them exactly how they should spend their budgets and address the needs of their particular students. And last week, people were asking for examples of districts that were overspending, and everybody's like, oh no, we can't say it on the mic. Can't say it on the mic. We might hurt someone's feelings. I mean, come on. We're all adults here. If you've got an example of waste, if you've got an example of a district that's living outside its means, that is the exemplar of this legislation, the need for it, then let's discuss it. All we got was a handout about a piece of technology that was a public-private partnership between a school district and their healthcare folks that identified a need. And the school district made a smart investment in technology so that their kids would be ready for jobs that are actually needed in their community. And that was held up as the example of government waste. That's an example of exactly what we need to be doing. That's an example of a school district being responsive to the needs of their community and to the needs of the private industry and the needs of their constituents. The fact that there has been no clear examples of districts that this is trying to remedy or address, other than that, just goes to show why this legislation is not needed. There's plenty of other ways that we can provide property tax relief, and we do that. And I've voted for most of them. But this is not the right approach, colleagues. We already have accountability. It is in the hands of those locally elected school board members. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Marfeld. Senator Bosselman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am opposed to the recommit motion into AM 1716. I believe There needs be more work done potentially with this bill. I think Senator Breezy is willing to do that. And I would look to see this move from general file to select. With that, I yield the rest of my time to Senator Breezy.
Senator Breezy, been yielded 4 minutes 38.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for that, Senator Bostelman. I appreciate it. And let's be clear here. 986 would work as intended. It would limit property tax askings to the higher of 2.5% or inflation, with some exceptions. And a lot of folks are pointing to this article they read this morning in the World Herald and Journal Star. And I think the point of the article is that it would go farther than that, and that it could serve to limit overall revenue. And really, from a close reading of the bill, that's obvious. And we talked about it for 3 days last week, but nobody last week that I recall suggested any changes. And so I'm asking, how do you want to change it? The issue brought up in the article, that's easily addressed. We can tweak the number higher. You can say instead of 2.5%, you can drive that up a little ways, and that tends to solve that issue. Or we can take out the clause that causes the cap to increase or decrease with fluctuations in state revenue, and that would make it similar to an LB 408 type situation. And that's not really what we want to do here, because I think that provision allowing the cap to increase or decrease with fluctuations in state revenue really is an important piece of this. It's both to protect schools and help them do their job, and it's also to protect taxpayers in the event of an influx of other revenue. Perhaps the best approach would be to make the 2.5% cap a limit on total state and local revenue. And in that way, it would still be a de facto tax asking cap, and tax asking authority would continue to float with changes in state aid, but it would eliminate the disparity in treatment between some of the equalized schools and the unequalized schools. And that really could be done with a stroke of a pen or stroke of a keyboard. And I'm willing to do this with an amendment on select file. And I realize that without an amendment like that, maybe we need something else too. The bill likely dies. And so if you want to be part of the solution, let's move this to select with the understanding that I'll make it a state and local revenue cap of 2.5%. And if we don't get to agreement there, it will die on select file, but I would do my best to accommodate many of these concerns that seem to have been raised. And if you have other concerns, anything else you want to see in there, let me know and we can talk about it. And with that, I would urge your opposition to the motion to recommit and Senator Hansen's amendment, and urge your adoption of AM 1702 and LB 986. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Breezy. Senator Slama.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. I rise today in support of LB 986, which I've consistently supported since my time in the legislature, and thanks Senator Breezy for his work on this issue. I'm going to yield my time to Senator Linehan here in a minute, but I just wanted to call something out real quick. Some of the senators in this body rose today to complain about an article that they read in the paper. Really? Senators Breezy and Linehan are statesmen and stateswomen who didn't personally attack anyone, so I guess if the shoe fits as someone who's unwilling to budge on an issue, like just own it, they just pointed out a simple truth, that structural reforms that would benefit taxpayers, schools, and students in this state are consistently blocked by the same people year in and year out. And the only solutions provided are completely untenable and completely unsustainable. And then we just stick our heads in the sand and go, well, they wouldn't compromise. Well, we wouldn't compromise with your poison pill amendment and your poison pill negotiations. If you're going to call out my colleagues, Senators Breezy and Linehan, and personally attack them on the mic with unfounded complaints so unprofessionally, don't be surprised when they don't light up your phone over the weekend to have a casual chat with you to see what you're willing to negotiate towards. And with that, I'd like to yield my time to my colleague, Senator Linehan.
Thank you, Senator Slama. Senator Linehan, 3 minutes 20.
I don't even know where to start, but I'm going to start by addressing Senator Moorfield's comments just a few minutes ago. The article that I handed out last week, I'm just gonna, you don't have to guess what it says. I gave it to all of you. So on page 4 of 5, they said they came across this table approximately 4 years ago at a national conference. It's been in the back of his mind ever since. This is a direct quote from the people who purchased the table. I didn't feel like I could ever come to the taxpayers and ask them to pay that kind of money for a table, even though I thought it was great. I've been hoping that a grant opportunity would present itself at some point, and then Viola, here comes COVID money, so we could buy it. And then a board member proposed the idea of using the table for the biology class. But the biology teacher said he wouldn't have much use for it. And the reporter rightfully asked, well, if you don't spend it on this table, what will you spend it on? Well, we'd probably spend it on summer school. Yes, summer school. That's what the first tranche of COVID money was supposed to go to. We have a crisis. I'm going to move away from our property tax crisis. We have 3 years now when kids have been in and out of school. They've been on remote learning. And I will say, and I am very proud, Nebraska public schools, private schools have done much better than the rest of the country when it comes to keeping kids in school. But we all got sent home in March 2 years ago. Little kids got sent home, lost 3 months. Then the next year was intermittent. This year has been intermittent. So if we have money, COVID money, extra money, it should be going to summer school. It should be focused, 1 minute or done. It should be focused on kids who are struggling, not even to catch up, just to get to where they should be. Just quickly, I handed out, this came up Thursday in our hearing, a picture of 3 homes. They're in the Mary R. Queen Parish in Omaha. These homes were built in the 50s and 60s by families like my parents, many of our parents, grandparents' generation. Their tax payment per month now, well, they don't even do it per month because their houses are paid for. So their property taxes, if you broke it down on a 12-month payment, is now more than their mortgage, their property taxes, and their insurance were when they bought these homes. You're literally chasing people in their 60s and their 70s and their 80s who built these homes out of their homes.
That's time. Thanks, Senator Linehan. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, priority motion. Senator Matt Hansen will move to bracket the bill until April 20, 2022.
Senator Matt Hansen, recognized open on your motion.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning again, colleagues. I'm glad we had an opportunity for Senator Breezy and Senator Linehan to address this bill and address some of the issues they wanted to talk about before I put up this bracket motion. What I wanted to talk about, though, is kind of holistically this debate and what we're looking at. Because there's been lots of, obviously this is getting personal, there's been some flings and some arrows already. And I want to point out that some of the things that are going on are kind of systemic of the problems that routinely are happening when we talk these revenue bills, and specifically when we talk on these same issues over and over and over again. Colleagues, we are approaching a cloture motion. I think we're within 10, 15, 20 minutes. So for Senator Breezy to just get up in the last 10 minutes and propose some sort of amendment that's not written, not discussed, is literally the 11th hour. It's 11 a.m. It was about 11:11 with 20 minutes left to debate. Hey, if you give us a chance to rewrite the bill completely, we'll try. After we have had over 7.5 hours of debate on this bill spanning most of a week. Colleagues, why is the burden on us as opponents when there is a bill that is fundamentally bad policy to try and fix the bill on their behalf, and then to have at the last second some sort of technical correction basically be pitched as some sort of compromise solution that we can move it forward. That is what we're dealing with, and that is what we're dealing with here. And additionally, it's come up a couple times again. Myself, others have challenged people accusing schools of runaway spending to come up with examples. And colleagues, literally the one concrete example we've got is that table in David City. It's literally one-time expense in one school district. Like even if you agree, I don't know enough about the table to have an opinion of it. But like we're talking about a single piece of technology that got bought with one-time funds once in one school district. I cannot overemphasize how in the scheme of all of our hundreds of school districts, how small of a drop of anything that is. That is, if that's the example that we're holding up, there should be a flurry of other examples to use, but instead it's this one example over and over again. And kind of some hand waving again at Lincoln for being expensive over time. Colleagues, we have time and time again kind of challenged some of the base assumptions and base statements supporters of this bill have gotten, and all we've gotten back as opponents are the same pieces over and over again. Talking about that article, colleagues, like I had been challenged on this microphone that my math was incorrect, or I wasn't interpreting the bill right, or I was overblowing things. And then to have it in an article basically conceding that the points on I had been trying to make, I'd been trying to work out math on the microphone, were in fact correct this whole time, was a bit jarring to me personally. It is difficult to see and difficult to know where do we go from that. And where do we go from that when, in my mind, again, there's these calls for compromise and there's these calls to move forward. But again, the goal to compromise is to compromise on an issue I'm fundamentally opposed of to get to another issue on TIOSA that I'm genuinely worried about the outcome. If we want to tie all of these bills together, if we want to tie them together with different ballot initiatives, we want to tie them together with the consumption tax, let's talk about them and let's talk about how they're all going to fit together. But I know, and we all know, that had there not been this opposition, had me and a number of my colleagues not stood up repeatedly for this past week, this bill would have flown through kind of difficult math and all. These limitations would have hit school districts and flown through, and they probably would not have been caught had we not taken the time to talk about this bill and to draw it out and to emphasize. Colleagues, again, over and over, we are challenging the notion of why is school district spending a problem? People aren't challenging the notion of property taxes being a difficult tax or difficult to pay. We're challenging the notion that our school district spending is out of control. Ultimately, this is, again, over and over again, an educational policy bill that's being gotten to via tax limitations and tax limit authority. This isn't lowering school district levies. This isn't changing tax levels. This isn't refunding the credit. This is a percent calculation on essentially school district budgets year over year in a way that is going to hurt Lincoln Public Schools. I'm comfortable saying hurt, in a way that is going to hurt Lincoln Public Schools. In addition to hurting Lincoln Public Schools, hold them out different than other school districts, different than most school districts, because they have the strictest limitations in the bill. And in addition, as it's come up over and over again, there are some pretty strict requirements, including having a supermajority of voters having to approve some of these issues, not even just a simple majority. So it doesn't even necessarily conform to our regular direct democracy tenets that we hold up in our Nebraska Constitution. Colleagues, all of these pieces in this bill, all of these issues are problematic. From the policy side to the implementation side to just agreeing that the math works out the same way, which I think we have some disagreement. Colleagues, all of these issues are problematic in LB 986. If we'd like to move forward, we can move forward, but we're going to have to stop talking about bills comprehensively, including that we know bills like this are just opening the door to mess with TIOSA in some way, but we don't know what that way is. And again, I want to re-emphasize this point that I feel like that's the same side negotiating with itself, saying I represent a high ag land, low levy district that doesn't get equalization aid, and I want to both get more equalization aid and I also want to change how school districts tax authorities in ways that probably both are either going to, at best, hold Lincoln Public Schools neutral and at worst hurt them. I don't know where I, again, as a senator who represents Lincoln Public Schools families, as a senator who represents Lincoln, am supposed to fit in that negotiation. Am I supposed to just let it happen around me? Am I supposed to not raise my objections? Like, what role am I supposed to play there? And what role am I supposed to have in that discussion? Colleagues, this is where we're at today. This is where we've been at. This is where we're going to continue to be as long as we keep having tax bills, spending bills, education bills, whatever they are, that are going to harm the quality of education for my constituents, because that is a line in the sand that I'm not willing to compromise on. Numbers are numbers, budgets are budgets, taxes are taxes. Sure, we can figure all that out. But if your insistence is upon a bill that I fundamentally believe will harm the quality of education for my students in my community, I don't know why I'm expected to negotiate and compromise that, especially when my negotiations and compromise are starting at the thing of just good tax policy or just good public policy. Like, I'm not necessarily getting what I want. I'm just trying to make the bill function correctly a lot of the time. That is the difficult position we are put in. And that is the difficult position we are. Colleagues, I know there's been some appeals, there's been some pleas to get this to move forward. We know time and time again that if you get a bill to select with some promised amendments, how quickly that can fall apart, how quickly a vote can get changed, how quickly some of this can come and change and move forward. If you've been in opposition to 986 this whole time, having a technical or minor change to fix a problem that's been in the bill the whole time shouldn't be the thing that flips you from no to yes. It should be a reconfirming that this bill has fundamental problems, fundamental issues baked in, and needs to be solved, and preferably, in my mind, just put away from the air. And if supporters like Senator Breese, Senator Linehan like this issue, they can bring it back another form, another way, with the mechanism that works correctly as they want it to work, and as they're willing to stand up and explain on the floor. So with that, Mr. President, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Senator Linehan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm just going to use the few minutes we have here before cloture to talk to the people at home. The same people who have stood up against this bill have been against any school funding reform we have ever tried to do the whole time I have been here. Whether it be trying to slow down the increases in spending, and nobody has ever, since I've been here, ever introduced a bill to cut funding for schools. It's always just, can we slow down the growth a little bit? Can we slow down the growth of property taxes? Same filibuster, same people. It doesn't matter what we bring, because the truth is, I've really come to believe this. The big schools, they like it just the way it is. They get all the property tax money. They can get it $1.05. Their valuations go up. I think Lincoln last year, 12%. They took it all. The little schools are too big. They don't have enough senators. They can't fight it. So the big schools, Lincoln being one of them, they take all the property taxes, no matter how much the valuations go up, they get the vast majority, Omaha, Millard, and Lincoln, the vast majority of the TIOSA funding, and it's fine. They like it. I'd yield the rest of my time to Senator Breese.
Senator Breese, 3 minutes 40.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Linehan. You know, I said it the first day, and I'll say it again. Nobody here wants to choke off education. But we do need to do this. And why do we need to do this? To ensure property tax increases climb at a reasonable, sustainable level. Number two, we have to ensure that we have a mechanism in place to ensure that an injection of additional state dollars into public education will yield property tax relief while still allowing for growth and still allowing for local control. As I indicated earlier on select file, I will make it a limit on total state and local revenue to eliminate the concern that was brought up this morning by various speakers. I think what we're proposing here is a good resolution of this, and I would ask for your support on the cloture vote. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Breese. Mr. Clerk, you have a motion at the desk.
I do, Mr. President. Senator Breese would move to invoke cloture pursuant to Rule 7, Section 10.
It's ruling of the chair that there has been a full and fair debate afforded to LB 986. Senator Breese, for what purpose you rise?
I request a call of the House.
It's been a request to place House on a call. All those in favor of calling the House, vote aye. Those opposed, vote nay. Record, please.
27 ayes, 1 nay to place the House under call.
The House is under call. All members, please return to the chamber and check in. The House is under call. A roll call vote in reverse order has been requested when we get to that point. Senators Wayne, Merman, and Lindstrom, please return to the chamber and check in. Senators Wayne and Merman, please return. All unexcused members are now present. The immediate vote is whether or not to invoke cloture. A roll call vote in reverse order has been requested. Mr. Clerk.
Sir Wishart. Voting no. Sir Williams. Voting no. Sir Wayne. Voting yes. Sir Walls. Voting no. Sir Vargas. Voting no. Sir Stinner. Voting no. Sir Slama. Voting yes. Sir Sanders. Voting yes. Sir Pansy Brooks. Voting no. Sir Pauls. Voting yes. Sir Merman. Voting yes. Sir Moser. Voting yes. Sir Morfeld. Voting no. Sir McKinney. Voting no. Sir McDonald. Voting yes. Sir McAllister. Voting no. Sir Lowe. Voting yes. Sir Linehan. Voting yes. Sir Lindstrom. Voting yes. Sir Lathrop. Voting no. Sir Coulterman. Voting no. Sir Hunt. Voting no. Sir Hughes. Voting yes. Sir Hickelman. Voting no. Sir Hilgers. Voting yes. Sir Matt Hanson. Voting no. Sir Ben Hanson. Voting yes. Sir Holleran. Voting yes. Sir Groney. Voting yes. Sir Gregor. Voting yes. Sir Geist. Voting yes. Sir Friesen. Voting yes. Sir Flood. Voting yes. Sir Erdman. Voting yes. Sir Dorn. Voting no. Sir DeBoer. Voting no. Sir Day. Voting no. Sir Clements. Voting yes. Sir Michaela Kavanaugh. Voting no. Sir John Kavanaugh. Voting no. Sir Breesy. Voting yes. Sir Brewer. Voting yes. Sir Brandt. Voting yes. Sir Bostelman. Voting yes. Sir Bostar. Voting yes. Sir Blood. Voting no. Sir Arch. Voting yes. Sir Albright. Voting yes. Sir Aguilar. Voting no. 28 ayes, 21 nays on the motion to invoke closure.
The motion is not successful. I raise the call. Before proceeding to the next bill, Mr. Clerk, do you have any items?
Mr. President, I'm fine, but thank you for asking.
Very good. We'll proceed to the next bill when you're ready. Mr. Clerk.
I need you to write pen down. Mr. President, next bill is LB 906. It's a bill by Senator Ben Hanson. It's a bill for an accolade into public health that requires employers to provide for a vaccine exemption. Introduced on January 7. Referred to the Health and Human Services Committee. The bill was advanced to general file. There are committee amendments pending.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Ben Hanson, you're recognized to open on LB 906.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. First, I want to start off with explaining the origin and purpose behind LB 906, especially in light of Senator Arch explaining the committee amendment soon afterwards and the changes of the bill to the bill after working with many involved stakeholders such as the Nebraska Hospital Association, Nebraska Healthcare Association, Nebraska Chamber of Commerce, the Department of Health and Human Services, among others. LB 906 would impact employees and employers across the state of Nebraska. In essence, an employee who does not consent to a COVID-19 vaccine requirement from their employer would be able to fill out a religious or medical exemption form from the DHH's website. Upon submitting the exemption form to their employer, the employer must then accept and provide for a COVID-19 vaccine exemption. We have worked very closely with all Medicare and Medicaid organizations to make sure we mirror federal language for religious and medical exemptions. We did not want to risk the compliance with federal guidelines, and I believe we have accomplished just that, protecting the employee from a mandated medical procedure or losing their livelihood, but also respecting the rights of business owners to provide protection for themselves as well as their establishment. Bodily autonomy is a concept that has been considered in the governing process of our country for the entirety of its existence. It is about the individual right to make decisions for one's own life, health, and future. It's about the individual's right to have freedom to live without being forced to receive medical procedures. The federal government has accepted this. The state government has provided for it through various legislation, and now I believe the world of industry and business should also recognize the importance of individual liberty when it comes to the COVID-19 vaccine. Employers are individuals. They write policies and make decisions that would best keep their business working in an environment of their choosing. This includes what steps they take to guide the impression they leave with their customer, what services they will give, the products they sell, and the needs they meet. Also included in each business plan is how the employer works with its employees, what benefits they offer, what safety measures they put in place for an accident-free workplace, etc. Recently, for some, this includes setting requirements for employees to receive a COVID-19 vaccine. This addition to the employer's scope of interest has been controversial since it not only affects the workplace, but it crosses over into the employee's personal and individual medical and religious lifestyle outside of their job. It is for this reason I believe these employers should provide an avenue that gives the employees an ability for exemption from the COVID-19 vaccine. Why? Because employees are also individuals. They know more than anyone what is best for their life, health, and future. If they have chosen to work for an employer who requires a COVID-19 vaccine, they shouldn't have to face the decision many in Nebraska have been confronted with. This being, accept the vaccine or lose their livelihood, career, and ability to provide for their family. If they have a medical reason to refuse the vaccine, they shouldn't have to risk harm to their health. If there's a conflict with the way they choose to follow their God or religion, employees shouldn't have to ignore their conscience. But this is the very predicament many have been faced with. To me, this is anything but the protection of bodily autonomy or the promotion of freedom to choose that comes with individuality our country supports. Employees in Nebraska should be allowed exemptions. This is why LB 906 was written. Since the COVID-19 vaccine became available, my office has been flooded with requests from across the state. Employees asking for help as the federal government threatened to mandate the vaccine and as employers started reinforcing the same policy. The freedom to choose being at the core of each email, phone call, and meeting. Nebraskans asked me to look at people as individuals who have specific needs and differing ways of life, each one capable of choosing. So I did introduce LB 906. I have worked with the Nebraska Chamber to create a bill that respects the employer. The Nebraska Hospital Association and the Nebraska Healthcare Association supported the changes I made to mirror federal laws and guidelines in order to diminish any confusion there might be. I listened to hundreds, if not thousands, of employees represented throughout the year who asked me for an option for exemption from vaccine requirements. This bill accomplishes all of that. We had to run a very fine line to make this work for all. And I encourage you to support LB 906 and the following amendments. Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor.
Thanks, Senator Hansen. Senator Rush recognized to open the committee amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. The committee amendment AM 1729 is substantially the same as Senator Ben Hansen's AM 1687, but the committee amendment replaces the green copy, becomes the bill. Page 2, lines 2 through 26 of AM 1729 would require the Department of Health and Human Services to develop a vaccine exemption form for an employee of most businesses to claim a COVID-19 vaccination exemption as it relates to workplace policies. The form will include a declaration by the employee that a healthcare practitioner has provided the employee with a signed written statement that the vaccine would be medically contraindicated, that a medical necessity requires a delay in vaccination, or that receiving the vaccine would conflict with the individual's sincerely held religious belief, practice, or observance. The original LB 906 included only an exemption for a strong philosophical, ethical, or moral belief or conviction, but that portion has been removed by the committee amendment. The exemptions currently in the amendment are exemptions that the federal government recognizes for vaccination exemption. If an employer requires their employees to be vaccinated against COVID-19, they may also require periodic testing or wearing of personal protective equipment at the cost of the employer. Page 1, lines 10 through 20 of AM 1729 would define employer as a person engaged in industry who has one or more employees. This is a change from the original bill, which required 20 or more employees for a majority of the calendar year. Employer would also include any party whose business is financed in whole or in part by the Nebraska Investment Finance Authority Act, including the state of Nebraska, its governmental entities, and political subdivisions. Employer as defined does not include the United States of America, an Indian tribe, or a private membership club. Page 1, lines 4 through 8. One other change from the original bill is that the amendment only applies to COVID-19, some variant or mutation of COVID-19, or conditions arising out of COVID-19, which was not specified in the original bill. LB 906, as amended by AM 1729, was advanced out of committee 6-0 with one member abstaining. There is no fiscal note. I want to comment as well, I take the opportunity to comment on the testimony that we received in committee on this bill. And several of the testifiers talked about what is happening right now in the employer-employee relationship, in particular as it relates to the religious exemption. And I want to read some from the EEOC guidance. And this was a document that was published in December of 2021, December 14th, 2021, by the EEOC, the US EEOC, what you should know about COVID-19 and the ADA, the Rehabilitation Act, and other EEO laws. And this is guidelines that is published by the EEOC. And here's a question was asked under Title VII, Civil Rights. How should an employer respond to employees who communicate that they are unable to be vaccinated for COVID-19 or provide documentation or other confirmation of vaccination because of a sincerely held religious belief, practice, or observance? And here's what they say. Once an employer is on notice that an employee's sincerely held religious belief, practice, or observance prevents the employee from getting a COVID-19 vaccine, the employer must provide a reasonable accommodation unless it would pose an undue hardship. And of course, they define that. Further down, they say, the employer should ordinarily assume that an employee's request for religious accommodations is based on a sincerely held religious belief, practice, or observance. However, if an employee requests a religious accommodation and an employer is aware of facts that provide an objective basis for questioning either the religious nature or the sincerity of a particular belief, practice, or observance, the employer would be justified in requesting additional supporting information. Under Title VII, an employer should thoroughly consider all possible reasonable accommodations, including telework and remote. One other quote that I would like to read from that EEOC document says this, quote, although prior inconsistent conduct is relevant to the question of sincerity, an individual's beliefs or degree of adherence may change over time, and therefore an employee's newly adopted or inconsistently observed practices may nevertheless be sincerely held. I read those because in the testimony that we heard in committee, there were a number of testifiers that came and testified to the opposite. What they said was that there was not an assumed recognition of a sincerely held belief, but rather it was the opposite. It was you must defend, you must prove, you must show evidence versus this reasonable questioning. So I obviously support AM 1729. I believe that it needs to be stated in our state statutes that the same requirements that the feds and the same exemptions that the same exemptions that the feds offer for medical and for religious are the same exemptions that we require in statute in the state. So with that, I encourage a green vote on AM 1729 and on the underlying LB 906. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Arch. Items for the record, please.
I do, Mr. President. Thank you. Amendments to be printed. Senator John Kavanaugh, 773. Senator Friesen to 939. Hearing notice from Natural Resources Committee. New resolution, hearing notice from hearing notices from Natural Resources. And Mr. President, Senator Friesen offers 293. That will be laid over at this time. In addition, the Banking Committee will meet in executive session following their hearings this afternoon. Likewise, Urban Affairs exec session after their hearings this afternoon. And Senator Holland would like to have the Agriculture Committee meet an executive session at 2:30 in room 1003. Name ads, Senator Groney, 713, Clements, 906, Moorfield, 1241, DeBoer, 1246, Moorfield, 1271. Mr. President, Senator Blood would move to adjourn the body until Wednesday morning at 9:00 a.m.
Members, you heard the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. We are adjourned.